Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Cait Donovan is here. Now, Cait is an international keynote speaker, and she is the host of Fried the Burnout Podcast, and she is author of the book, The Bounce Back Ability Factor. And even to top it all off, she's an acupuncturist with a master's degree in Chinese medicine. And Cait's creative burnout recovery solutions have been featured on so many podcasts, so many online magazines. We're talking about Forbes, NPR, the New York Post, and so much more. So she is here to help us out with this burnout problem. She helps your organization reduce burnout so you can keep top talent. And Cait has many stories and many pieces of advice to share with us. So Cait, glad to be speaking with you.
So thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thrilled to have you as well. And it just now clicked with me that the sign behind you, the fried is a frying pan. So mind blown already right off the bat. And so we introduced you a little bit, but in your own words, are you all about? What has you just so passionate and focused these days?
My mission is to end burnout culture. That's the long and short of it. And I believe that we do that by convincing people one by one that they don't need to participate in it anymore. So I know that there are people out there that are going for systemic change. I'm here for it. I need their help. I need them to go do that work because that's part of breaking this down. But my input into breaking down burnout culture is making sure that the people that I'm working with continuously decide to not engage in burnout culture on a day-to-day basis.
I love it. And I never liked that term burnout, right? When people say it, sometimes it's a cop out or it's just this weird metaphor. And what comes to mind for me when people say that is that maybe like they're doing all these things that aren't like making a difference or aren't leading to much, or they aren't seeing the outputs from their inputs. But just to get to like the bare basic fundamentals, when you say burnout, what does that even mean? Because I'm not even sure most people know.
So burnout, according to the World Health Organization, finally got a definition in May of 2019. Like really good timing just before a pandemic,
Yeah.
And the definition says that burnout has to have three components. The first is physical and emotional exhaustion. The second is cynicism and depersonalization. And the third is feeling a lack of impact or a lack of productivity. All three of these components must be present for an extended period of time. Now, that is really hard to quantify. What I tell people is that the difference between just being stressed and overwhelmed and being actually burnt out, which has physiological changes associated with it, the difference between those two things is that when you're stressed, you can take a weekend off and you're ready to go Monday morning. You might still not love your job, but you've got the oomph and the energy to make things happen. When you're burnt out, you could sleep for a month and still not feel recovered. This is why my book is titled The Bounce Back Ability Factor, because your ability to bounce back is the difference between just being stressed and being burnt out.
I like that. That's an important insight that you might just need a break. You might just have been pushing yourself too hard. And I was even having a conversation earlier today on a different podcast where someone was talking about how sometimes when you're in, like, say, your career or your business, you might get to kind of a dead end and you might have to change things. And that might, I mean, people might be kind of fooling themselves, right? And like they're getting to this kind of stress and overwhelm and saying, oh, well, I've hit my limit. And it's like, no, you've gotten to the point where you now need to change things. So I think that's an important distinction there of you might just be stressed or overwhelmed or something you might need to change, or you might be this really special, now specifically defined thing called burnout. And so when someone comes to you or when you speak to these organizations and you deal with this burnout problem, what is there to be done? What's the first step in even beginning to tackle this?
The first step will depend from person to person because you will have different symptoms based on where your body holds weaknesses. So, for instance, if you as a child had crazy allergies, you might have sinus issues when you're burnt out. If you had a car accident at 12 and had whiplash, you might have neck pain and migraines when you're burnt out. So, stress and burnout will sort of attack your weakest link. So what we're going to do to recover from that will depend on how it's showing up in your world. The overarching things that are true for everyone are this. Number one, we need to do something likely externally. So this is not mindset. This is not outlook perspective. We need to do something in your environment that will increase your interpretation of the fact that you're safe, that makes you actually feel safer. And this can be really small. Like if you have a blanket on your couch that is beautiful, but when you use it, it scratches your face and makes you uncomfortable, getting a softer blanket could be part of your burnout recovery. Because what it does is it tells your brain, I'm safe and cozy and taken care of here, and now I can start to relax. In order for your brain to start to recover, because that's one of the physiological changes associated with burnout, is that you lose some brain cells right behind your forehead in your prefrontal cortex. You lose brain cells there. So in order for your brain to rejuvenate itself, it has to feel safe. This is a conversation that we could have probably for about 8 hours, but this is also like if you have a color on your wall that's really jarring to you and doesn't feel good to you, you might want to paint your wall a color that feels more calming and safer. These small shifts on the outside can go a long, long way. Then we work on internal safety and building self-trust. This is another thing that sounds too basic to move a needle, but it works. We call it foundational self-care in my business. And it's the unofficial tagline of Fried is hashtag pee when you need to pee. Because foundational self-care is not about baths and rainbows and unicorns and pedicures. It's about stopping the computer, shutting down your screen when your eyes are tired. It's about feeling like you're feeling antsy and like you need to move and actually going outside and walking. It's about peeing when you have to pee. It's about eating when your hunger kicks in. It's about drinking when you're thirsty. And all of these things tell your body and your brain through your vagus nerve that if you give me a signal, I've got your back, I'll respond to you. And that increases your internal feelings of safety, which allows your brain to get back on track.
Interesting. And what a concept, right? To listen to your own brain and body when it says, hey, I need something to help it out. And then when your brain says, I don't feel safe, I don't like that color on the wall, to change those sorts of things. And as you said, it's easy to just say that it's too basic and too simple, but if it was so simple, then why aren't you doing it? And so so what does this look like when you help out these organizations and people are experiencing burnout? And like some of these examples you're saying are like helpful for like a home office or something like that, but is there a burnout like in dealing with like interpersonally, like with like a
Of
team
course.
or like dysfunction environment? There's like, I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many different layers of burnout, right?
We could go on, we could wax and wane for hours. When we're talking about creating safety in the workspace, what we're really typically talking about is psychological safety. However, if you have a really terrible chair and your body is uncomfortable all day at your office, asking for an accommodation for an improved chair might be on your list of things to do for your burnout recovery. And on a larger scale, the more systemic scale, so when I'm working with teams, one of the first things we do is work on psychological safety because you can't feel safe if you're being attacked. You just can't. And we all know that bullying and narcissism and racism and all sorts of things happen in the office. So working through some of those things as best we can and increasing levels of psychological safety in the workplace will also add to our overall feelings of safety and help us recover from burnout. It also will help our team members prevent burnout if they're not there yet.
And it seems like a lot of this is going back to this idea of safety. And like you hear about that a lot when dealing with like self-help and mindset. The starting point is almost like that your caveman brain wants to feel safe. And that's sometimes why you don't feel like doing something that's out of your comfort zone, or you don't feel like taking a risk or entering a social environment because your brain wants to keep you safe. And so it seems like a lot of your thinking here is that your brain needs the reminders to be safe, and that we can like being safe and being productive and happy don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can find some middle ground where we can reassure our minds that we're safe, but also find a way to do great things.
Yeah, and the safer you are and the more things you can put into place, the more risks you can take. This is not about creating a level of safety that means you're going to feel always safe all the time, everywhere. We need you to increase your base level of safety because what you had clearly wasn't enough if you're burnt out. But increasing it doesn't mean making it 100 out of 100 because your brain, once it is sort of back in gear, your brain will continue to grow based on challenges and not necessarily safety. So this is a paradox. And your ability, oh, that's a whole separate conversation, but your ability to hold a paradox is also crucial to burnout recovery because a lot of things that come up here are this and that. That and this. This is a cause and a symptom. This is a beginning and an end. We have to keep playing with the things that come up because we're often untangling concepts and then holding them side by side and saying, well, this is true over here and this is also true over there and they're opposite. So how can that be true? But it is.
That
That
is
was that confusing?
it was, but that's part of the paradox, right? That
Yes.
and you're giving me all these weird flashbacks that uh sometimes I had to get my own thinking out of the all or nothing mindset, right? Like, oh, I'm having
Yes.
a bad day, and it's always like that. And then there's sometimes the paradox is too much to handle, and then there's the cognitive dissonance where I think two conflicting things at once. And so it's so much to think about. But to help us kind of unwrap some of this, I'm sure you have some fun stories because you go in and you do the consulting and you have the podcast where you share all kinds of cool stuff. And so is there a fun story that relates to what we're talking about today?
There are so many fun stories. One of the things that I do with people is I walk them through something called the resentment journal because resentment shows you where you're pouring energy and you don't need to, right? Where it's not coming back to you. And so I have people do a resentment journal and I do this as workshops in companies. I do it as a keynote. So I do this work a lot. And I had a woman say to me after, you know what I realized? I am really resentful that my children don't wear the clothes that I'm laying out for them at night. I take the time, I iron their clothes, I set up their outfits, everything is prepared. All they have to do is get up and get dressed, eat and go to school. And they get up, they wear whatever the heck they want, they ignore everything that I've done, and I'm mad that I'm doing this thing. I looked at her, I said, "Isn't your youngest 10?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why are you still picking out their clothes?" And she stopped. What she realized was she had been bullied as a kid for having mismatched clothing, sometimes dirty. She wasn't well cared for. And so she was trying to increase her own safety by making sure her children were properly dressed, not realizing that she didn't really have that much influence over that, and her safety wasn't actually improving by doing it because her kids weren't participating in it. So we changed the model. I said, well, what can you do with them instead? You have 15 minutes now that you don't have to iron their clothes and prep them because we're going to stop doing that. And so what they started doing instead was sitting down for 5 minutes at the end of the day and saying, what was your favorite part of your day today? And sharing good memories. So instead, they created more closeness, which increased her feelings of safety. And she eliminated this useless task that wasn't helping her or anyone in her household.
Amazing. And it's incredible just to have some of these insights and ahas just by doing the journaling, just by getting some of this in writing, because it's so easy to get caught up in the anger and then not maybe slightly solidify the abstract concepts. And it seems like just a lot of the self-help, self-improvement stems from when you were a kid, all these bad things happen, right? It happened to all of us, but then that became the default setting. And then now as adults, our job is to unlearn and relearn these things for ourselves and also not infect the family and not pass down those other things from the next generation. And then also, because she was getting angry, there's something else I heard a few weeks ago it blew my mind. It was like saying something like, like if you get angry, it's because your expectations are wrong. Like you were expecting so much and you were let down, and that caused the anger. So it seems like in her case, she was just stuck in the same way of thinking with the ironing of the clothes. And you said, well, hey, change your expectations, and instead of doing this, use the time for that. And then now you won't be just setting yourself up for failure. And it seems like they're breaking the cycle and just not repeating the same loop of bad behavior.
Well, and it's changing your expectation and also changing your action. I often have people say to me, "But I'm resentful about this situation and nothing about this situation can change." And I said, "Well, yeah, of course it can. You can not engage in that situation." Yeah, but then everything will fall apart. Okay.
And then
If
what would
you're
happen?
the
Right.
right? Exactly. If you're the only glue holding it together, does it need to be held together that badly? Especially in a workplace environment. If it needed to be held together that badly, then there would be other people gluing also. And if there are not, you have to ask the question, did everyone abandon you? Or were you acting as a martyr? And did you take it on to prove that you can do it and fix it and save it and be the best? But
And
if
then
you let it go and it falls apart and it's necessary, guess what? It'll get put back together somehow because there will be no choice. If you let it fall apart and it just falls apart, maybe you didn't need to be holding it all this time.
so it is time for different thinking and different actions, and maybe
Yeah.
doing something a little uncharacteristic or kind of scary just because if you're like you said, if you're the glue that's holding it together, it's like, why are you're wearing yourself out? You're causing your own burnout by doing this. And so, you're a podcaster and you're a speaker, and you know that it helps so much when you're speaking personally, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're academic or speaking from the ivory tower, like that's no fun. So as far as Miss Cait Donovan and her own burnout or her own struggles, can you tell us about that so that we can relate to you? Like, what have you really what's made you angry? What have you struggled with as far as your own journey?
My burnout was severe to the point where I had a hard time walking 200 feet. I was that tired. And during that time when I was going through my recovery, resentment was the thing that I kept coming to. I was resentful of everyone everywhere all the time because I created this set of rules and I was like the moral superiority police going around saying, if everyone just acted the way that I act, then everything would flow better. It's like this absolutely ridiculous idea that if I'm good enough and everyone else is as good as I am, then the world will work better, you guys.
If only, just
And
listen to me.
yeah, if only just listen to me. I know all the right rules. I know how to be considerate. And when I'm considerate, you're supposed to say thank you. And when you're over here, you're supposed to act like this. And when the little old lady gets on the tram, you're supposed to give her your seat. I'm not sitting down, but you're sitting down, so you get a. I was constantly policing the world, trying to make everybody act right so that I didn't feel so encumbered by having to be the one that acted right all the time. Instead of releasing my need to be in charge of the world's energy at all times and deciding that I needed to be in charge of my energy at all times. And if I was on a tram being judgmental and resentful, then the energy that I'm spilling out into the world is crappy. So is that the way I actually want to show up? And is my moral superiority helping anyone? When I realized it wasn't, my world fell apart because that was the glue that was holding me together for a long time. When I let that go, when I followed my resentment and said, well, I don't actually need to be a part of that, so that resentment's not necessary. And I followed it over here and I said, well, people are over here aren't even asking for my help, so I don't know why I'm getting involved. I can pull out of that. Absolutely have nothing to do with this over here, so I can pull out of that. And all of a sudden, the only thing I had left to pay attention to was myself. But I had been in a 35-year plan of self-abandonment, and I didn't know how to be with myself. So I had to start drinking when I was thirsty and peeing when I had to pee.
Very nice, very helpful, and a little scary and awkward, but I think it helps to ask those questions. Like you said, where does your resentment flow to? And the behavior and the thoughts that you're having, is it helping, and is it helping anyone, or is it just that you're putting all this, you're focusing outside of yourself as a way to avoid what's inside of you? And if you systematically kind of say, well, is this important? Is that important? Can I pick my battles? Can I not get so stressed out or OCD about that? Then you can then kind of narrow down your focus into yourself and just and not be so scatterbrained and actually make some progress. And so how do people make this sort of long-term progress? Like, I know we're only here for like a brief flash of time. We're only here on a podcast, and people need to know about your book and about your podcast and about your speaking. So how can people find out more about you and really dig into this and really make a change for themselves?
The best place to go is the podcast. That will lead you to everything else that I do and gives you 230 plus episodes of information of how to break down these systems that we've scaffolded inside our bodies for so long. So head to friedtheburnouttpodcast.com. Everything is there.
Fantastic. And so as far as Fried the Burnout Podcast, do you have a favorite episode? Is there a logical starting point? Do you say start with the most recent, with the first episode? Where's a good place to jump in?
So I have a blog post on my website that gives people the top episodes to start with, especially if they're just getting into it. There's also some Spotify playlists that you can look up. If you type in Fried the Burnout Podcast on Spotify, there's a few playlists that will say these are the episodes to start with, etc. So people can look that way. But if that's all of that is too much, scroll through the titles and click on the one that resonates. Don't think too hard about it.
And I've been there sometimes when I just said, I don't even know where to start. And I just look at a list and I say, I don't know why number 6 on that list is what I want, but there's a reason why that captured my attention. Maybe some subconscious actions going there. And so don't think about it, just go and jump in. And so if you yourself have been feeling these feelings of burnout and saying, well, what I'm feeling, is it burnout, or how can I break it down, or how can I improve? And many of these things that Cait has been mentioning here about her own journey or about what she sees and helps with people, if you have been relating to this, and it is time right now to go to friedtheburnoutpodcast.com. And as we're wrapping up our conversation here, Cait, I always like to put my guests on the spot and ask them for a fun quote or lesson to kind of get us through. That way we're not just saying goodbye, but we're just like saying something profound. So does anything come to mind as far as a helpful quote or lesson to send us on our way as far as reducing and recovering from our own burnout?
I'm going to repeat myself.
Okay.
Pee when you have to pee.
Very nice. Okay, so pee when you have to pee, and I might just go and pee after we're done with this podcast episode because I'm listening to what my body says, and it's a feedback loop, and it goes both ways. And so friedtheburnoutpodcast.com is the place to go. And if you want Cait to speak at your event, or you say, we're looking for someone who is speaking about burnout, who can you recommend? Consider Cait Donovan as your speaker, because Cait has so much to say about burnout. She interviews guests on her show, so check out friedtheburnoutpodcast.com. And it's been very wonderful speaking with you, Cait.
Same, Robert.